there affirmed that the hostilities are not quite over yet. What's your sense of where this is headed?
It's really unclear where we have to see this attack, this missile. We have to see this attack, this missile attack, and as was mentioned, Bezalel Smotrich said that Tehran will tremble. There are, I think, parts in the Israeli government that are not very happy with the ceasefire. Bezalel Smotrich was already one of them, even before this missile aimed at the north of Israel. He said that we had a huge victory, but still there's a bitter taste left because the regime was not taken down. So there are elements in the government that would maybe like the war to go on, at least for some time.
How does Netanyahu convince those elements to abide and respect this ceasefire? As you said, that we know the nature of his cabinet and the hardliners, like the finance minister. He has to deal with them. Will it be a problem for him to deal with them? Can he convince them in the long run to accept and abide by the ceasefire?
If it would, again, it's a complete guess because it's happening now, but I think if it's one missile, then maybe with Trump's help, he can still maybe strike some symbolic strike in Iran and go on with the ceasefire. But again, if it's something more, I think it will be more difficult. It depends much, of course, on Trump.
Indeed. A lot depends on Trump, as you said. What does that say about the U.S.-Israeli alliance? What does it suggest to you? It seems that the U.S. president has quite a lot of influence on the Israeli government.
In this war, at the moment, it was not clear who is leading who. Whether it's Trump that is leading Netanyahu, as we have seen the last 24 hours, maybe, the announcement of Trump on a ceasefire, while on the other hand, it's quite clear that on the first days of the war, it was Israel leading the U.S., and that in the beginning, the U.S. was quite hesitant and said that this is a unilateral attack by Israel. Then they adopted it, and then, of course, they joined it. So it's not very clear who is in the lead here at the moment. Of course, Trump is declaring victory and peace, eternal peace. Netanyahu is declaring that all the war goals were achieved, but it's still, it's not very, the fact that the US was involved in an attack on Israel's behalf will be remembered in Israel as a positive thing in most of the Israeli public, but it may be remembered worldwide and maybe even the US as a sign that now the US is part of the Israeli, I wouldn't say war machine, but at least of the Israeli strategy, the way Israel acts in the Middle East, that the US is an active part of the Israeli policy in the Middle East. This may have risk also.
And how will the Israeli public be viewing Prime Minister Netanyahu? What's his standing right now? Of course, there had been a lot of criticism of the war in Gaza and the fact that he hasn't been able to bring all the captives home. If the ceasefire is confirmed and holds, how will that change for him? Will that change his fortunes, do you think?
First of all, for the moment, we have a notice from the home front that people can leave the shelters. So it seems that this threat has been dealt with. The atmosphere in Israel, certainly there's a great euphoria. People feel that Israel won this war, that they have struck the nuclear facilities of Iran, of course killed so many top leaders and top scientists, and that no airplane was shot down, and that Israel is the big boss of the Middle East and it can strike wherever it wants. At the same time, the memory of these 12 days in the shelters, almost 30 civilians killed in the attacks, almost 10,000 people had to leave their homes, the whole building collapsed. This is not a sweet memory. And the fact that that the ceasefire does not say that Iran will renounce uranium enrichment, let alone developing ballistic missiles or supporting what Israel calls the axis of evil, the organization that it supports in the Middle East. This fact may make Israelis feel that maybe we have not gained so much, and as was said before, we will return to Gaza. Gaza is still there, the war is still there, the hostages are still there. This is the big problem that Netanyahu will have to face now, and I'm not sure that the war in Iran will make this job easier.
Meron, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your views and bringing us a perspective from Israel. Meron Rapaport joining us there from Tel Aviv. Now, just to remind you that we are awaiting a news conference here in Qatar from the foreign minister about the situation in the region in the wake of the Iranian attack on a U.S. military base here in Qatar. And also, we're expecting, of course, comments on the latest developments and the ceasefire, which was announced by the U.S. president between Iran and Israel, which the Israelis say they have accepted. We'll bring that news conference to you live on Al Jazeera when it happens. In the meantime, let's move on to Gaza, and more Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces there while they were waiting for food at a distribution center. They're among at least 37 people killed across the Strip since dawn on Tuesday. Casualties have been taken to Al-Auda and Al-Aqsa hospitals. There have also been funerals for some of the people killed on Monday while seeking aid in the north of the Strip. Let's get an update from Hani Mahmoud, who's in Gaza City for us. So the war in Gaza continues, even as there are other issues unfolding in the region. Bring us up to speed with what's been happening there, Hani.
Well, Folly, great news. Ceasefire between Iran and Israel. Tension eased and regional powers are stepping back from an edge of a larger war. But the morning here, as every other morning for the past 20 months, is quite heavy. More screams, more tears, and more trauma, more funerals and bidding farewell for family members and family members and relatives dying either at distribution centers in the northern territories or in Rafah city or the central area near Netzarim corridor. 37 Palestinians have been killed, and this is a combination of a direct killing targeting residential homes here in Gaza City, in the southern part of the city, a Sabra neighborhood, a densely populated neighborhood, and more recently became overcrowded by the numerous and forced evacuation orders that pushed many of the people in the eastern part of the city toward this part of Gaza City and the western part near the coastal road. Another residential home in a shelter refugee camp at early hours of last night, where 3 people reported killed. They happen to be from one family. Also, the 5 people here in the Sabra neighborhood happen to be from one family as well. At distribution centers, the Israeli military did not miss an opportunity to kill Palestinians waiting for aid parcels and food parcels and sack of flowers near these areas in Rafah and Netzarim and the northern part of the Strip. 30 people is the combined number of people killed while waiting for aid. They were transferred to various health facilities, including a Shifa hospital. The scene as of yesterday, late evening hours of many of the people who were transferred on animal-drawn carts or inside civilian vehicle, it's rushed to a Shifa hospital. The emergency ward turned into a blood bath by the large number of injuries whose injuries were very consistent: shot in the back, the lower part of their back, in the back of their heads and the neck, which means following the strategy of shoot to kill. Many of them unfortunately died inside the emergency ward as they were waiting for medical care and intervention by the doctors. That did not happen given how busy and overwhelmed a Shifa hospital, let alone the fact that the Shifa hospital is not operating as a proper health facilities as we know it. Pre-October 7th has been reduced into just a small, simple facility, a small ward for emergency, and that's about it. And that repeats itself across the Gaza Strip. The drones are still buzzing and hovering at a very lower level at the eastern part. We hear often in the past hours more of the home demolition that targeted many of the remaining residential buildings in the areas that turn now into vast fields of rubble that can be easily seen from a distance. We can see this is as part of a long Israeli strategy of making Gaza uninhabitable, because think of it, when this is over, people are going back to nothing. There is nothing to go back to, and it's more of making Gaza as quite uninhabitable as possible.
Okay, Hani, thank you very much for the updates. That's Hani Mahmoud live there in Gaza City. A reminder of our main news this hour on Al Jazeera, and the Israeli government says it's agreed to a ceasefire deal with Iran hours after it was announced by the US President Donald Trump. This comes after nearly 2 weeks of conflicts, 12 days of conflicts between Israel and Iran. Now, at this hour, we are awaiting a news conference from the Qatari foreign minister, who will be speaking alongside the visiting Lebanese prime minister. There you see the room has been set up with the flag of both countries, Qatar and Lebanon. We are, of course, expecting them to talk about the developments in the region and the announcement of the ceasefire, as well as the Iranian attack on the American base here in Qatar, the Al Udeid base, which happened on Monday evening. And we've also heard that foreign ministers of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the countries will meet here in Doha today for an exceptional meeting after the Iranian attack on the US base here in Qatar. To discuss these latest developments, let's bring in Luciano Sakara, an associate professor of Gulf politics at Qatar University. We wait to hear what the Qatari leader, the Qatari foreign minister and prime minister will say there. But the developments in the last hour, a bit of a concern, given what the Israelis are saying are incoming Iranian missiles towards Israel. This is an extremely fragile truce, isn't it?
Yeah, it's still confusing what it was accepted, how it was accepted, and who accepted it. We have a lot of mixture of information now. They are reporting that they are actually missiles that have been launched against Israel, and I don't know if
Will that be viewed by the Israelis as
I mean, they are informing like that they
break
broke the
ceasefire?
ceasefire 1 hour after they accepted it. So it doesn't look very well, but we have to see what happened. One thing what we have to bear in mind as well here is that who is accepting and who is the decision maker in Iran right now. Who decided that the ceasefire is being accepted? The president, the foreign minister, Khamenei, the head of the IRGC. It looks like some area of decision making is independent or autonomous from
Right, because
power.
it does take a long time. We've seen this in other cases where a ceasefire is announced, but the information hasn't filtered through everyone, right? So there's still hope that this could,
Exactly.
die
And
down
in every
chaos.
ceasefire,
Yeah.
everybody tries to take advantage until the last minutes of the ceasefire is entering into effect. The problem is supposedly the ceasefire started 1 hour ago. I assume that there will be an explanation on the Iranian side, said that once they accept it, they will formally accept and they will start the ceasefire on their side. But so far, the Iranian press did not report that they accepted the ceasefire. So I assume that we will have this kind of exchange or this kind of confusing narrative between one side or the other before we hear something official.
Right. Is this because of a lack of trust, I guess, between the two sides, the unresolved military objectives, even if the Israelis are saying that their military objective, which was to destroy Iran's nuclear program, has been achieved, though we don't know what the final assessment of that is? Or is this a risk of other actors perhaps getting involved in the conflict?
I'm not worried about other actors. I'm worried about, there was never trust. There's the word trust does not exist between Iran, the United States, and Israel. Of course, they have the reasons not to trust each other.
Right.
Lately, what Israel did is, despite the fact that there were conversations, they decided to launch an attack, despite the fact that Trump said that he will take 2 weeks to decide. He launched an attack the following day. So Iran has nowadays has the right to say, okay, why should I trust that the ceasefire will be in effect if tomorrow Israel decides again that their military targets were not achieved or their military goals were not achieved, and tomorrow they decide to launch another attack. So this is something that trust needs to be built based on observation, on monitoring, on compliance with what it was negotiated. But so far, we don't know what was actually negotiated. We heard the information from Trump, but we don't have any official information from any of the two sides.
Right. Now, in the last minute or so, we've heard, Luciano, from the Israeli military, which has ordered its citizens to leave protected areas, told them to leave protected areas after it identified the missiles launched earlier from Iran. So it would seem that the threat for now, after this latest missile launch, is over for now. And of course, again, remains to be seen if this would be considered as a breach of the ceasefire or if the two sides will agree to continue respecting it. Let's talk about Qatar now. There is an emergency meeting of the Gulf Cooperation Council ministers happening in Doha later today after the Iranian attack on the Al Udeid base here in Qatar, the American base. What are the implications of that attack, and what do you think the messaging will be from the GCC after it?
The message from the GCC will be that they are all united, that they don't accept this kind of intervention from Iran, even though they all criticize heavily the unilateral attack of Israel and the United States. All the GCC consider that this was not acceptable, but in any case, they will make a strong statement against the Iranian attack. This cannot happen, and they will show support to Qatar, of course.
All right. Luciano, thank you very much. Do stay with us. It is coming up to 8 GMT, and you are watching Al Jazeera and our continuing coverage of the latest developments in the Israel-Iran conflict. And the Israeli military says it has identified a new wave of missiles launched from Iran soon after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to U.S. President Donald Trump's ceasefire. I'm Foliba Thibault, you're watching Al Jazeera live from Doha. All the latest developments on this story coming up. The U.S. president has urged Iran and Israel not to violate the ceasefire. A wave of Iranian missiles hit a city in southern Israel minutes before the U.S. ceasefire came into effect. And this came after Iran attacked the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East in Qatar, saying it's a proportionate response to the bombing of its nuclear sites.
Daddy's taking a
Also in
shower.
the news, Israeli attacks on Palestinians queuing for food in Gaza continue. More than 30 people have been killed across the Strip.
Daddy's taking a shower, Ajay.
Thank you for joining us. The
Okay.
Israeli military says it's intercepted a
I was
wave
telling
of
when
missiles
he
launched from Iran. This comes just hours after
When
U.S.
he
President
finished,
Donald
then
Trump announced a
he was
ceasefire
calling.
between Iran and Israel had come into effect. Israel's defense minister says he's instructed the military to respond forcefully to what he calls a violation of the deal. Israel Katz says Iran's capital, Tehran, will be targeted with high intensity. Now, the Iranian attack came less than 2 hours after the Israeli government said it agreed to the ceasefire. Israel released a statement announcing it removed what it called a dual immediate existential threat from nuclear weapons and ballistic
I'm calling
missiles.
again.
Let's take a look at that statement. The Israelis thanked President Trump and the United States for their support in defense and their participation in eliminating the Iranian nuclear threat. In light of achieving the objectives of the operation and in full coordination with President Trump, Israel has agreed to the president's proposal, the statement said. It also said that Israel will respond forcefully to any violation of the ceasefire. Israeli citizens must continue to strictly adhere to the Home Front Command's instructions until full compliance with the ceasefire is confirmed.
First he was calling on.
Well, we're following all the latest developments
First
with our
someone was calling on
correspondents
the
in
iPhone.
Washington, D.C.,
Now on
Tehran,
Daddy's
and Amman. We
big
begin
phone.
with Noor Odeh in the Jordanian capital. Noor, so it would seem that the latest threat is now over, with the Israeli military
Maybe
telling its
as he was
citizens that they
putting
can
on
leave
the
protected
iPhone,
areas. Bring us
after
up to
that,
speed
nobody
with what's been
picked up.
happening.
After that, now he called on the
That's right, Foley. At 10:27 local time, we saw warnings from the Israeli Home Front Command to Israeli citizens in northern Israel, particularly the Haifa area, to be close to shelters because they had seen and detected missiles fired from Iran. We did not hear sirens going off here in Amman, as has been the pattern and the case in previous launches, including this morning. But then we saw reports of interceptions over the sky of Haifa, large explosions. According to the Israeli military, those missiles have been intercepted. The incident is over, but of course the response from Israeli ministers has been immediate. The Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, just posted on his X account 3 words: Iran will shake. And then we saw that statement from the Minister of Defense, Israel Katz, who, as you said, has instructed the Israeli army to respond with high-intensity airstrikes on Tehran, the capital of Iran.
An extremely fragile truce, a very complicated situation, Noor, and it's been quite an eventful 24 hours. Lots of ups and downs, an emotional roller coaster, really. Tell us about what the Israeli Prime Minister said when announcing that Israel had accepted the ceasefire which had been announced by the U.S. President earlier. What is the narrative in Israel?
Well, the narrative is one of victory, that Israel had achieved something historic. He even said in that statement that Israel is now standing on par with other world powers. Now, imagine that. That kind of statement is quite incredible and noteworthy, really. But it is because Netanyahu needs to make this a win. This is unprecedented. Israel striking Iran is something that Benjamin Netanyahu has has been personally working on since the 1980s, so shortly after the Islamic Revolution. And, he has been able to secure that. He has dragged the U.S. into it. Donald Trump led the U.S. strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, 3 of them, including Fordow, and then Donald Trump announces a ceasefire. There was very little possibility for Benjamin Netanyahu to say no, so he has accepted. But really what we see is an equation of calm for calm. This is not a peace deal between Iran and Israel. This is not an agreement that is signed by both parties as far as we know, because we don't know if papers were exchanged. But we know that a ceasefire has been announced, one that allows Benjamin Netanyahu to claim victory, one that also allows Donald Trump to claim victory, and at the same time, one that gives Iran space to say that they did not raise the white flag, they were not defeated. Benjamin Netanyahu needs to save and preserve that narrative now that those interceptions happened after he accepted the ceasefire.
Indeed. How will the Israelis be viewing all of this? Again, we are in a very difficult situation where we don't know whether this will hold and whether it will last. But I imagine if the ceasefire holds, this will come with a great sense of relief in Israel, because the last 12 days have been costly to Israel and the Israelis.
They have been very costly, and the coming few hours will be nerve-wracking to everybody, including Israelis who have been exhausted and drained by 12 days of non-stop sirens, non-stop rushes to the shelters, the bomb shelters, and to economic losses. This is not something that Israelis are used to. This is the first time that Israel is in a confrontation with such a large and capable army, and so the losses they've incurred, according to official numbers, is unmatched. Just in 12 days, a little more than 1.3 billion US dollars, though that's the amount of individual claims filed to Israeli authorities. That's in addition, of course, to the losses to the economy, the losses to businesses, the bill of the war effort to the Israeli coffers, and so on. So Israelis wanted this to be over. They can take the win now, because they were beginning to ask questions about the end game of all of this and whether there was one. But also, what is happening simultaneously is that attention is going back to where it should have been as far as many Israelis are concerned, which is Gaza. Israeli captives remain there. Israel's genocidal war has not stopped for over 625 days, and there is no end in sight. And that's why we heard from opposition leaders, from the families of Israeli captives, that the war on Gaza must now end. That is what the government is expected to do, and we'll wait to see if this coalition government can survive talking end of war on Gaza, or it will just, use the remaining appetite for war in Gaza itself.
Noor, thank you very much for the moment. That's Noor Trump, of course, the one who announced initially the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and he's posted quite a lot throughout the night on his Truth Social, the latest post being that the ceasefire is now in effect. He said, please don't violate it. Tell us about how this all unfolded, how this ceasefire and the announcement by President Trump came about.
Well, I mean, there are varying accounts. He says that Israel and Iran both called him simultaneously, pretty much at the same time, and said, we want peace. The Iranians have given a different account. In fact, one of their news broadcasts a little earlier, one of the news anchors said that Trump called Iran in a begging-like manner. That was the term she used. Just after that attack on that US airbase in Qatar. But, what we're seeing now is it's been 3 hours since this message that Donald Trump put on Truth Social, that is his social network platform. And we're just seeing just how fragile this whole process is. And he knows this. And that's why he wrote in that very short message, please do not violate this. What will be interesting, Folly, is that we didn't see a huge amount from the president yesterday. I mean, obviously, we heard a lot from him because he was on Truth Social a lot. He's always on Truth Social, but he wasn't on camera. In about 2 hours' time, he's due to go to the NATO summit in the Netherlands. So we're expecting to see him on the White House lawn, where he'll likely get a few questions from reporters. Obviously, he's going to the NATO summit. He's going to be surrounded by world leaders. He wants to portray himself as the peacemaker in chief. So he'll want to make sure that this ceasefire is holding. But, you know, as with Donald Trump, you know, you never know.
I mean, this is a victory, no doubt, for President Trump announcing this ceasefire between Israel and Iran. What have people been saying, especially those who were opposed to the idea of the U.S. intervening in the conflict, the U.S. intervening on behalf of the Israelis?
Well, he seems to have scored quite well with the Republicans, considering that, you know, just over the last few days, the Republican Party, his party, was really split. You've got the hawkish Republicans who were appearing on television and they were saying, President Trump, you've got to go in, you've got to do this, launch this attack, this is your only chance. And at the same time, you had the Make America Great Again section of the party, which is effectively the part of the party that he founded, which is very much about America first. It's about not getting involved in these foreign wars. It's about saying, you know, those are other countries, let them sort out their problems. And they were very against this. And this was really dividing the party. And you could see that the president was being torn in different directions, depending on who he was listening to at the time. But what has happened is those who wanted him to go in are feeling vindicated because America went in, it did what it wanted to do or what it needed to do, and then it came out. At the same time, those people who didn't want to get involved in any long entanglements, any foreign wars, are seeing this as America going in, securing peace and coming out again. So you've got people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example. She's a congresswoman from Georgia. She is a fierce backer of Donald Trump. She pretty much always backs Donald Trump. She had been very much against this, and this had been getting quite a lot of publicity because of her normal stance. She's now coming out and saying, you know, thank you for pursuing peace. Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House, he again always backs Donald Trump. He says this is a perfect example of peace through strength. So even some Democrats who you wouldn't expect to be backing Donald Trump, and they pretty much won't, they are, through gritted teeth at least, a few of them, sort of saying this is good as long as it holds. But they're also raising questions about whether or not he passed over his constitutional, he went too far over his constitutional authority. Okay. And there are calls for his impeachment. But at the moment, the ceasefire appears to be holding, and it seems to be good news for the president.
Thank you, Phil, for that. Phil Lavelle in Washington, D.C. Let's now check in with Ali Hashim in Tehran, the Iranian capital. Ali, what can you tell us about these latest missiles that the Israeli military says were fired towards Israel from Iran?
Well, first, we are anticipating a statement by the Supreme National Security Council explaining to the Iranians and also to the world the Iranian stance with respect to the ceasefire. It was a very complicated deal. This is what we understood. And the main issue was the issue of timings. Now, with respect to the latest launch, it's clear that Tehran wants to say that it is the one that shoots last. And that's a kind of a messaging of the airstrikes within its territories, or what Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu described as the freedom of movement. Because the presidency in Lebanon gave the Iranians a lot of lessons, and this is one of the reasons why we are seeing till the last moment Iranian barrages of rockets being launched towards Israel. The idea of reaching a ceasefire here is not a decision that was taken by the foreign minister on his own or the leadership on its own. This is a decision that was adopted by the Supreme National Security Council. So it's not an individual decision. It's a country that took this decision. Now, the issue about this whole image yesterday, since President Trump started talking about the ceasefire, there was an issue with Iran stopping or ceasing hostilities, and then Israel ceasing hostilities in 12 hours later. This was the main hurdle to reach a ceasefire. And now the Iranians are trying to stress this issue by action, by launching the rockets till the last moment. However, we are not sure what is going to happen now and whether Israel is going to retaliate to the last batch of rockets that was sent. But at the end, it's clear that this is
You got
a
to go around
round that was fought.
Right.
And cessation of hostilities
Okay, perfect.
doesn't mean a peace deal.
Nada.
Ali, I want to ask you about Qatar and Iran. We're expecting any moment now a news conference from the Qatari Prime Minister, who will be speaking alongside the visiting Lebanese Prime Minister here in Doha. Qatar, we understand, has summoned the Iranian ambassador following Iran's attack on the American base here in Doha on Al Udeid. What are the implications about their targeting of this base in Qatar, which is a country that they have good relations with?
Well, it's clear that for the Iranians, they wanted to send, aside from the attack that happened yesterday in the statement issued by the National Security Council, one over three of this statement was meant to send messages to Qatar that this attack wasn't meant to breach the Qatari sovereignty, wasn't directed against the Qatari people. But then Qatar is a sovereign state, and what happened, of course, is a breach of sovereignty, and that's why we saw this reaction from the Qataris, from the Gulf countries, from most of the countries around the region and the world. But for the Iranians and the Qataris, the issue is that despite what happened, the Qataris were still leading the mediation to end this war in the region, and this is a huge victory for the Qatari diplomacy, because they were able, despite what they had to go through or what they underwent, they were able to mediate, they were able to deal with cold blood and offer this mediation to both sides in order to reach to what we can describe as the first ceasefire, or at least the cessation of hostilities.
A cessation of hostilities, a truce, a fragile one, but a truce nevertheless, Ali. And as you said, the Iranians, as the Israelis, are presenting this as a victory. How will the Iranian public be viewing this and remind us of the cost for Iran and the Iranians these past 12 days of war with Israel?
Well, what President Trump described or called the 12-day war was a war that was imposed on Iran. Israel started this war. It started it in a shock and awe, killing all the commanders here in Iran. So this created a sense of solidarity among the people, despite differences with the system, with the establishment. But people felt that this was an attack on their own country, on their own sovereignty. So they reacted in this way. Of course, this has come to an end. But at the end, the main challenge for Iran and for the government of Iran is the day after. The day after the war, how is it going to deal with this situation? What are the conclusions that it's going to derive from this war? How the relation between the government and the opposition, the government and other sectors of the society going to be? Because many are actually advising here, we're reading in some newspapers, that there is a need to seize the moment and exploit the moment to kind of forge a new social contract between people and the government. So these are issues that some analysts say are creating a kind of an opportunity out of this challenge.
Does this, Ali, open the way forward for any diplomatic engagement or re-engagement between Iran and the Americans?
Well, it's clear that the United States of America is presenting itself in this conflict not as a party, at least yesterday, but as a mediator. And this is a new role the United States is playing, despite not having relations with the Islamic Republic of Iran. But given the fact that this war has come to an end in a way or another, let me just say to a ceasefire, because we cannot go towards the war saying it came to an end. However, to a ceasefire, there is a possibility that we see a new engagement. Now, there is no chance but to go towards engagement. These are the possibilities. The Iranians will have to talk to the world right now. And the world, it seems, according to President Trump, is interested in talking to the Iranians. Probably it's a moment that could recalibrate the Middle East as we know it, the region as we know it, international relations as we know it, and it could have a real impact on relations between the two countries.
Okay, Ali, thank you very much for the moment. That's Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim, live there in Tehran. Let's now speak to Luciano Sakara about these latest developments as we continue to wait for this news conference here in Qatar by the Qatari Prime Minister. Luciano is an associate professor of Gulf politics here at Qatar University. What's your sense of where this is headed? We have a truce in place, a fragile one, which is a bit shaky, as we've seen in the last hour. Do you think it will hold?
Difficult to predict. I mean, we know that this kind of ceasefires take a lot of time to be effective, and that both sides are complying with what they agreed. We don't know yet if officially both agreed what Trump suggested, and we don't know exactly what was suggested in this proposal by Trump, apart from stopping the attacks. And also, something that we have to bear in mind is that there is distrust among the three actors. Even, I mean, if Iran is not recognizing Israel, there is no diplomatic relation between Iran and the United States since 40 years ago. So it's difficult to see how this is going to hold. Moreover, when last 12 days ago there was a conversation ongoing between Iran and the US, and then it was broken.
Okay, Luciano, I'm going to interrupt you. We're taking you now live to the news conference that we've been telling you about here in Doha. Qatar's Prime Minister, who is going to be speaking alongside the visiting Lebanese Prime Minister. That is not the Qatari Prime Minister yet. They're just setting up the stage here, as you can see. But we are waiting for this news conference, which is happening as Lebanon's Prime Minister is visiting Doha. We're expecting, of course, both leaders to discuss the latest developments in the region, the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which was announced by US President Donald Trump a few hours ago, and which the Israelis have said they accept. We're also expecting, of course, Qatar to react to the attack on its airbase at Al Udeid by the Iranians, the American airbase, I should say, at Al Udeid here in Qatar by the Iranians, which Qatar has condemned and has even summoned the Iranian ambassador to lodge a formal complaint, we understand. So we will wait to hear that, those comments in just a few minutes. Luciano, I think this is the Qatari Prime Minister coming now to the podium. Not sure. Okay, well, let's wait and see when that begins. Luciano, what can we expect to hear from Qatar in the wake of the Iranian attack on the American base here in Doha?
Well, I think we already heard yesterday that this is something that Qatar will not accept. I mean, anything that happened that is violating the airspace and the territory of Qatar cannot be accepted by the Qatari government. So the response, or at least the condemnation of this attack is something that should be done, and to make clear Iran that even though there is an American base here, retaliations against America cannot be made in Qatari soil.
How do you think the U.S. role in brokering the ceasefire between Iran and Israel, how do you think it will shape its standing in the Middle East, President Trump's standing in the Middle East?
Well, it's confusing. We don't know what Trump wants to be, his role of mediator, peacemaker, justice maker. I mean, he bombed Iran in a way that he would destroy everything in order to promote peace. I mean, this is something that is contradictory, at least, to say that, first of all, I will bomb everything, killing I don't know how many people, destroying all the infrastructures I can, and then I force you to sit to make peace with me and with the rest of the world. This policy of...
That's what he said. I mean, he did talk about diplomacy through strength.
This policy, even Russia or China, on how he would perform his foreign policy, not only in the Middle East, and Iran was the best case that he could find in order to say, I can sit to negotiate anything with anybody, but as far as you obey what I am trying to tell you. And if you don't accept that, I will impose my conditions by force, which is actually what was expecting to decide. But this is not being a peacemaker. This is not being a mediator. This is being a bully, or this is being an actor that wants to impose their will and its hegemony in the whole region.
Now, the confrontation between Iran and Israel is over for now, but the hostilities that have existed for decades remain. How do you see that going forward? What will it take, do you think, to lessen the tensions and to make this ceasefire turn into something more lasting, perhaps?
I don't think it will move to something else. I mean, as far as there are no recognition and there are no political relations between Iran and Israel, it would be impossible to think about something more than a ceasefire. Stalemate, again, no, they will never be friends, they will never be cordial relations, but at least there will not be open fire, as it was before. Before there was a cold war, no war, no peace. I think we're going to come back to this situation in which there is no direct intervention. We have to remember that there was no direct attacks between Israel and Iran along 40 years, at least not declared ones, not military direct attacks. And only this happened because of what happened in Gaza. And this is something that we have to remember. The Gaza problem is still there. And as far as there is a problem there, there will be always excuses for continuation of any kind of hostilities in the whole Middle East.
What about the other regional actors in all of this, Saudi Arabia, the UAE? Do you see them recalibrating their position following these events?
I assume that at this point, I mean, it's difficult to see what they are thinking, if they were happy or unhappy with the situation. I mean, they criticize both Israel and the United States because of the unilateral attacks. But of course, none of these countries want Iran to impose their will in the whole region. They all want an Iran state that is possible to discuss with and to engage in conversations, but not the country that they fear or that they want to, they want to contain, which was the policy before. I mean, before all the G states were more worried about containing the influence of Iran rather than engaging with Iran in a constructive dialogue. Now we are in another phase, and I assume the all GCC states want to keep that trend that was established in 2022 with the normalization of Iran with the Emirates and Saudi Arabia.
Okay, Luciano, thank you very much for the moment. Luciano Zakara here in Doha with me. Let's get the perspective from Iran and speak to Abbas Aslani, who's joining us from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Abbas, what is your sense of where things stand right now? A ceasefire has been announced by the U.S. president. The Israelis said that they accepted. We have no official response from Iran, as far as I know. And in the last hour or so, we've seen, according to the Israeli military, missiles fired from Iran. Where do you think this all stands, and where is this headed?
Solly, as we speak, there's an official statement from Iran's Supreme National Security Council confirming the ceasefire. They are saying, and they're framing in this way, that they have been able to impose the ceasefire on the Israeli side. But in the meantime, they have been warning that they are not trusting the enemy, and Iran's armed forces will be ready to retaliate against violation of the ceasefire. Meanwhile, regarding the news reports on missiles being launched toward Israel, Iran's state TV also denied launching any missiles against Israeli targets. So this seems that there has not been, let's say, missiles coming from Iranian side. That's yet question what has been happening, but at least it's not from Iranian side. So in the early hours of this ceasefire, the situation might be fragile, and it needs, attention from the both sides in order to avoid, a renewed escalation. But it seems that we also have the official confirmation from Iranian side, and it's important to take note that there will be no violation of the terms of this ceasefire.
Very important to bring us that latest line there from Iran, and thank you for it. So we now have official confirmation. Abbas Aslani, our guest in Tehran, telling us that the Iranians have also now accepted the ceasefire after the Israelis announced 2 hours or so ago that they would agree to the ceasefire, which was announced by the U.S. president. The Iranians now also saying yes, they will abide by the ceasefire. And Abbas Aslani, you're also telling us that Iran has denied launching the missiles which the Israeli military said came from Tehran an hour or so ago, because we did see an alert in the Israeli military telling its citizens to take shelter. But as Noor O'Day, our correspondent in Amman, was telling us, there were no prior warnings. Usually when these things happen, there is a warning that sounds over Amman in Jordan, which is then also relayed in Israel. But we didn't hear it this time. And now you're telling us that the Iranians are denying having launched missiles towards Israel this morning.
Well, you know, this could be, first we have to know if there's any missiles being launched against Israel. We have to know that where exactly the source of those launches are. And this could be also suspicious given the record that Israel has had in adhering to the previous ceasefires with other parties in the region. They have had the record of violating that, and they have been trying to look for pretexts. But the official, let's say, stance and position here in Tehran is that there's a ceasefire and they have not launched missiles. So, but if you are hearing something different from Israeli side, does not necessarily, you know, indicate that, you know, that's the case. And we have to be watching what will happen in the coming hours. And if, you know, Israeli side wants to respond, I think this could be a suspicious, you know, incident that they are looking to find a pretext in order to break that ceasefire. But the Iranian side is not saying, is denying any, let's say, renewed attacks on Israel.
Okay. Abbas, you talked about Iranian leadership presenting this and their accepting of the ceasefire as a victory. Will that also be seen as a victory by the Iranian people, the Iranian public? Because these past 12 days have been extremely costly to Iran. We've had over 400 people killed, if I'm not wrong, and a great deal of material damage as well.
Fully, you know, this aggression was initiated by Israel, followed by further attacks by the United States. And the point that they themselves were the first ones to looking for a ceasefire, and they were trying to convince Tehran to accept that ceasefire, tells us that, you know, Iran's continued response against the targets in Israel and against American interests was not the thing that they wanted. So this could be framed as a kind of, let's say, success of Iran's resistance against aggression. And in the meanwhile, you know, as a result of the recent aggression, the distrust among Iranian public toward West and Western capitals has increased. And this also has increased the backing of the government among the public. So this seems that, you know, comparing to the previous months or years, the government and the public in the country, despite some differences, some problems, they are in good terms these days, and this could be an opportunity to somehow communicate in a way that could benefit for both. And these days, I think what people are hearing from the government will be much more acceptable to them than what they are hearing from the Israeli or American side. They are not trusting Benjamin Netanyahu and American President Donald Trump, specifically after the recent developments.
Abbas Aslani, thank you again for being with us and bringing us the view there from Iran. As I remind our viewers again of the latest developments, Iran in the last few minutes has denied reports of violating the ceasefire with Israel, which was announced by U.S. President Donald Trump a few hours ago. Iran denies launching missiles towards Israel, saying that they did not come from Iran. The Israeli military had said earlier that it detected launches from Iran, to which then the Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said Israel would respond forcefully. But now the Iranians are saying that they were not behind.
Well, these hours, we will keep hearing these cross accusations about who violated the ceasefire. This happened in every ceasefire. It's always complicated to make sure that both sides are complying this ceasefire because both want to get
Right.
as
What
much
do you
as-
think it's going to take for both sides to respect the ceasefire? I mean, we have few details about how it will work, of course, but what mechanisms do you think need to be up and running for it to be
That's the problem.
fully operational and respected?
The only one that can monitor this to happen or to be compliant, both actors to be compliant, is the United States. But there is no trust between the United States and Iran, and it's one of the aggressors. That's why it's complicated. It's the first time that you have a mediator in this ceasefire between two actors. That they already bombed one of the countries that is signing this ceasefire. So I think it's a unique occasion. I don't remember any other occasion like that the mediator, that the one who negotiated this ceasefire or asking the ceasefire to both actors, bombed one of them.
Okay, Luciano, do stay with us. I'm going to bring in Meron Rapaport now in Tel Aviv, editor and writer at The Local Call, which is an Israeli news site. Meron, in the last few minutes, we've had the Iranians denying that they launched a missile attack on Israel, the one that was announced by the Israeli military about an hour or so ago, which the Israeli defense minister said there would be a response to. What do you make of that, and how do you think this denial will be viewed by Israel?
Of course, it is very hard for us to know where the truth lies. It could be that a missile was launched, maybe without a decision by the Iranian government. It does seem that the Iranian would like to keep the ceasefire. There are elements in the Israeli government that are not too happy with the ceasefire, although they say that Israel had a great victory. But still, they are not very satisfied with the ceasefire. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, the defense minister, Israel Katz, has also, along these 12 days, have shown that he's interested in regime change also, although he didn't say it in so many words, but it was quite clear that this is where he's aiming to.
Right.
So there are many elements that would like to go on a little bit.
How will Prime Minister Netanyahu deal with those elements in his government, those hardliners who want this war to continue, who've said they want the war on Gaza to continue as well? It would seem, Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to please perhaps the US President Donald Trump and accept the ceasefire and have it hold and be successful. How can he convince those hardliners in his government to get on board?
It's not an easy task, and we've seen that during the Gaza war, that Netanyahu more or less went with Ben-Gvir and Smotrich when they refused the ceasefire, when they refused a deal to release the hostages. He went with them. So I'm not sure that he will be able to stop them. But yes, as you said, Trump is in there too. And you have to add another thing. I think that although there is some kind of euphoria in Israel that Israel has succeeded in its goal and has delayed at least or even completely destroyed the Iranian nuclear threat, the Israeli public, the Israeli home front is not ready for an attrition war, that a war that will go for weeks. Israel is paralyzed in the last 12 days. Of course, we've seen missiles hitting major cities, in the heart of major cities. 30 people were killed, almost 30 people were killed. Almost 10,000 people had to leave their home.
Right.
So it's not so easy. And I think Netanyahu would like to have this over.
Right, which even begs the question, Meron, whether Netanyahu can really declare a victory here, because this all began with the premise that Israel wanted to end Iran's nuclear program. He says it's been successful, but we don't really know to what extent the Iran nuclear program has been damaged, do we?
No, we don't know. I'm not 100% that the Iranians themselves know exactly what happened there. There's this all deep in the ground, so I'm not sure that the whole picture is there. But what is quite certain, and this is not a success for Netanyahu, is that he said at the beginning that that the negotiation will be under fire, while the Iranians said that they are ready for a ceasefire, and that the negotiation will be held only if there is a ceasefire. Now we have a ceasefire without a deal, without Iran committing to anything concerning its nuclear program and the missiles program. So this is not a real success in the sense that the Iranian regime is there,
Right.
some kind of nuclear program is there, and the missiles are there.
Meron, let me ask you about the U.S.-Iran relation, the U.S.-Israel relationship, I should say. Is there a sense, perhaps, that Israel here could have given up part of its sovereignty, because we have now Donald Trump being the one who effectively decides when to start or end a war? What would you say is the state of the relationship, and who has the most influence right now in the relationship?
It's an interesting question because the, let's say, first 10 days of this war, it seems that it is Israel who is leading and Trump lags behind and try to keep up and claim that this is an American war. While it was an Israeli war. At the last, I would say, 48 hours, it changed with the American attack, and now with Trump announcing the ceasefire before Israel did. Yes, I think Israel is now in awe to the U.S. It will be more difficult for Israel to resist demands from the U.S., from Trump, after he participated directly in the attack. So yes, to a certain extent, Israel is stronger because it has the Americans with it at war. This is something unprecedented. But at the same time, as you said, they're giving up some of their sovereignty.
Very interesting. Thank you, Meron, for now. Meron Rapaport in Tel Aviv. Let's go to Phil Lavelle in Washington, D.C., our correspondent there. I'm going to ask you the same question that I just asked to Meron there, Phil, about the state of the U.S.-Israel relationship, how it's seen in Washington, and who has the most influence right now.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, America has Israel's back. I guess that's the way to put it. You know, you think about during the election campaign, leading up to the election and everything that was happening in Gaza, there was no question that Benjamin Netanyahu wanted Donald Trump to win the election. You could see that the relationship between the two men had been repaired after it had been quite fractious. And even before the election, Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife going to Mar-a-Lago to meet Donald Trump, and Trump saying that he would be the most pro-Israel president ever. And you could see that relationship was one that was mutually beneficial to both men. The thing is that now what's happened with this last 12 days is that even though the US was providing assistance to Israel, so it was providing it military support, it was providing it weapons, it had managed to keep itself at arm's length from it. It had been Israel's battle with Iran, and the US had been taking that sort of backward seat. Now the two are linked, and Donald Trump has quite clearly tried to make himself out to be the peacemaker here, because he knows that there are many people in the US that don't want the US to go into Iran on a longer term mission, because there are so many open wounds from Iraq and Afghanistan here. So they've been they've moved into Israel sort of reluctantly, but also, like I say, Donald Trump wants to be seen as the peacemaker, and you know, he's been taken along by Benjamin Netanyahu, but at the same time, it's a very mutually beneficial relationship for both men.
So what's been the reaction then to President Trump's announcement of this ceasefire between Israel and Iran, especially from those who did not want to see the US involved in the war.
He's getting a lot of good press from the Republicans. I mean, as you would expect as a Republican president, but you've got to bear in mind that his own party that he controls so much of, for so many days, there was like an open battle going on within this party because you had people who are perhaps what you would call the hawkish Republicans. So your likes of Lindsey Graham, a senator from South Carolina, Ted Cruz from Texas, who were openly appearing on television. And they were appearing on one channel. They were appearing on Fox News because that's the president's favorite channel. And they were directly addressing him down the lens and saying, Mr. President, you've got to go in here. You've got to take this opportunity to do what is necessary and to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon. But at the same time, Donald Trump is also beholden to his base. And his base is the Make America Great Again movement. And that is the part of the party that he controls, or that he founded. That's what he says on his caps, Make America Great Again. And their attitude was very much that they didn't want to be drawn into some kind of long-running war that could break out in the Middle East, because they are very much about America first. They're about maintaining that distance from foreign entanglements, from letting other countries sort out their own problems and not America trying to be the world police. So he was getting pulled in both directions. And what was quite interesting was there were some very prominent podcasters and influencers. And that just goes to show how things have changed nowadays, because it's not just politicians, it's people like Charlie Kirk, for example, who is a fairly young guy, quite conservative. He leads a group called Turning Point USA. He was seen as quite instrumental in helping Donald Trump appeal to that younger audience during the election. People like him were saying, this is not what we should be doing. Tucker Carlson, who used to be, again, a host on Fox News and is quite a well-known face here, was openly saying, we shouldn't be doing this. We should be keeping our distance. What we've seen since then, is Donald Trump has managed to kind of appeal to both camps, because you've got the hawks who have seen him go in and do what they feel needed to be done with Iran. But at the same time, you've got those Make America Great Again sort of section of the party who have seen him go in, sort of do what needed to be done, but come out again and not have to draw the US into it. Because the last thing people here want is the thought of troops, down the line being sent in, boots on the ground, when there are so many people who are still getting over Iraq and Afghanistan. Iraq was, 20 years ago? But still, to so many people, it is such a fresh wound.
Okay, Phil, thank you very much for that. For the moment, Phil Lavelle in Washington, D.C. Luciano Sakharov, let me ask you about the U.S. role in brokering this ceasefire, and Donald Trump's most precisely. How will that affect his standing in this region? He already had good relations with a number of countries. How do you see the U.S. role in brokering this ceasefire shaping the rest of its relationship and foreign policy in the region?
Well, Trump has been going back and forth in different aspects, asking for ceasefire. In different conflicts between Iran and Israel, and between Israel and Hamas as well. So he has not been consistent, and lately he has not been the one determining the agenda. It was Netanyahu who decided to derail the conversations when they were about to take the sixth round of meetings with the United States in Oman. So it's not clear whether he is the one who is going to make peace. He's the one that is going to impose American new pacts in the Middle East, or he's just trying to do what is asked to do by some powerful actors, and according to his own way to make politics that is more based on business approach and using the...
And we saw that recently with his recent visit to the region when he traveled to Qatar, to the UAE and Saudi Arabia as well.
Exactly. It's not a consistent policy. We cannot see a Trump doctrine that is based on some principles, some values. It's based on more opportunities. It's more pragmatic. And when he needed to use the force, he claimed since the very beginning, even his last presidential term, that he doesn't want to start any war. But this is totally inconsistent with that policy, with that premise. Pushing peace through war, through bombing a new country that was never bombed by the United States in his whole history, shows a very different approach compared with what he said before. So I don't see United States moving forward to a more mediator or more peaceful role. I think that
You don't think so? I mean, the Abraham Accords is something that he was pushing for, establishing a relationship between a number of countries in this region, Saudi Arabia and Israel. That's something that he pushed for during his first term, and that he seems intent on wanting to achieve in this second term. You don't see that happening in the region? What is the posture of the leadership in this country
the situation
regarding
of
Israel?
the
Has that
Abraham,
changed?
I mean, he was successful at the his first term because he finished with this. But we see the result of that, the consequences of that. This was on the detriment of the Palestinian cause. And we are facing all these wars that started in October 2023 because of the abandonment of the Palestinian cause and because of the lack of support that the Palestinians had in order to establish the two-state solution that everybody seems to be abandoned right now. So expecting to enlarge this Abraham Accords without fixing the core problem that we are now seeing, that is Gaza still there. Gaza and Palestine, because West Bank is also becoming targeted. I don't see how this can happen. I don't think that any Arab country now will sign any agreement as far as this is only imposed by the force, imposed by Israel and imposed by the United States without solving any of the previous situations that they are.
So are you not hopeful that now that there is a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, and hoping that it holds, of course, that a ceasefire in Gaza could be next, perhaps? Because, again, Trump wants to be remembered, as you said, known as the peacemaker. He's always talked about winning the Nobel Peace Prize and so on. Could that be the next step, perhaps?
First of all, there will be only a ceasefire. There will not be a peace agreement. There was no be normalization between Iran and Israel. On the other hand, we see that while the worldwide attention was paid on what was going on between Iran and Israel, Israel was killing people in Gaza. I mean, the amount of people that has been killed in the last 12 days is amazing, and nothing changed in that context. So, and Trump stopped talking about that. Basically, there is no conversation about ceasefire in Gaza. There is no conversation about exchange of hostages for something else. So Trump is not interested anymore on that because it's not attracting worldwide attention. This is attracting attention. Claiming that he finished the 12-day war is something that he's proud of. Moreover, when he received this kind of accomplishment by Netanyahu, praising his behavior and praising Trump as the only country that dared to do that was done against Iran.
Luciano, thank you very much. Again, we are continuing to wait for this news conference here in Qatar. A news conference that will be held by the Qatari foreign minister. There is movement in the room. It looks like it's imminent. He'll be speaking alongside the visiting Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, who's on an official visit to Doha. They are, of course, expected to address the situation in the region and this ceasefire that's been announced between Iran and Israel. The Qatari Prime Minister also expected to comment on the Iranian attack on the American base here in Doha, the Al Udeid base. Qatar has summoned the Iranian ambassador to lodge a complaint against Iran over that attack. We will wait to hear from the Qatari Prime Minister and the Lebanese Prime Minister as well. Luciano, let me come back to you and ask you about Qatar's role in all of this. They, it would seem, also played a role in convincing Iran to accept the ceasefire with Israel.
Yeah, it seems so. At least it was reported that the Emir had some role in this negotiation, which is good. I mean, the fact that there is still, this shows that the relation between Qatar and Iran has not been harmed because of it, at least not harmed in a big extent. There will not be, embassies that they are going to be closed or nothing like that. I think that there is an understanding that this was something that needed to be done by Iran, and no harm was made against Qatar interest, and there was no harm aimed by the attacks, the Iranian attacks. So the fact that Qatar can be still a reliable actor in this, on all these
An
measures.
important regional mediator, as we've seen
Exactly.
also with the war on Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, Qatar did not lose that role, and they can still keep that role with Iran, mediated between Iran and other countries. And this is what I wanted to make the difference with the United States. The United States now is pretending to be a mediator between Israel and Iran, but first they bombed Iran. Qatar is not engaging in any military action or activity against any other country, mainly in those countries that they are trying to achieve a peace with. So Qatar's role is still very relevant in this context. It remains to be relevant, and I think now much more enforced than previously. Qatar suffered from an attack, an unacceptable attack from Iran in its soil, and however, they are still in this position that they don't want to abandon. I think that this is a very good signal for Qatar as well.
Right. A good signal for Qatar. And I think, no doubt, despite the fragility of this ceasefire, a positive step for the region as a whole, isn't it?
Anything that is moving towards the ceasefire, cease of hostilities, and that they stop the launching of missiles from one side to the other, and mainly that we see no more people being killed, is a step forward. How sustainable is it? It depends on the rulers of all these countries. But anything that is moving toward at least a little bit more of peace or less people being affected, I think it's a good step. But again, I repeat that main problem is still there. I mean, all this mess that has been created in the last couple of years, almost a couple of years, started with something that nobody is fixing. I mean, the international community forgot about what is going on in Gaza. There are no more strong diplomatic attempts in order to paralyze the massacre that the Gaza people is facing. And everybody is more worried about the enlargement of this conflict by incorporating Iran in this conflict. So all the focus is now trying to prevent a nuclear war, to prevent a bigger war that involves many state actors, while the attention is not paid anymore on what is going on in Gaza.
But we do keep the attention here on Al Jazeera, on Gaza, and on the suffering of the people on Gaza as Israel's war there continues. The situation we're in today is a complicated one, no doubt. On the one hand, as you said, there is a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which everyone is praising. But on the other hand, the war on Gaza continues. And as you said, we haven't seen as much investment from the international community, from the Americans, in trying to end that conflict. What do you think it's going to take for that to end? What do we need to see from not just the US, but also the Europeans, who, it has to be said, have been quite absent from the scene, haven't they?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, Europe is demonstrating that they have no capacity to influence. And when they were changing a little bit the narrative and they were starting to criticize Netanyahu for the continuation of the killing of people in Gaza, Netanyahu changed drastically the narrative of the European countries that started to support Israel's rights to defend themselves against a non-existent attack from Iran and a non-existent nuclear threat from Iran. So I don't see how the European Union now can change again their discourse and starting to criticize Netanyahu again. Every time that European Union countries started to say something that is more critical towards Israel, there is something that they force them to change their narrative and to say, no. In any case, whatever Israel is doing, we still support Israel. We still support Israel's self-defense right against any other actor in the region. And this, I think, delegitimize the role of European Union.
Luciano, thank you very much. As always, good to get your thoughts. Thank you for sticking around and continuing to follow all the latest developments in this breaking news story that we continue to cover here on Al Jazeera, and the ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which was announced a few hours ago by the US President Donald Trump. Let's remind you of the latest developments at 9 GMT. Iran's military chief has denied the Israeli accusations that the ceasefire had been violated. The Israelis said missiles were launched soon after the truce came into effect. The defense minister of Israel, Israel Katz, said he instructed the military to respond forcefully and that Tehran will be targeted with high intensity. Israel says the missiles intercepted, Iran says the missiles intercepted by Israel were not launched from Tehran. Again, a denial from the Iranians that they launched missiles towards Israel after the ceasefire was announced. Now, earlier there was an Iranian attack 2 hours after the Israeli government announced the ceasefire. Before that, there was an Iranian attack. Before that, the Israelis released a statement announcing that they had removed a dual immediate existential threat from nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles when they announced that they were accepting the ceasefire that was announced by the U.S. president earlier. Here's what that statement said. Israel thanked the U.S. president and the United States for their support in defense and their participation in eliminating the Iranian nuclear threat. It said, in light of achieving the objectives of the operation and in full coordination with President Trump, Israel has agreed to the president's proposal, but added that Israel will respond forcefully to any violation of the ceasefire. Israeli citizens must continue to strictly adhere to the Home Front Command's instructions until full compliance with the ceasefire is confirmed. Well, we have also received a statement from Iran's Supreme National Council, and it reads, the divine reward for this profound and meaningful conduct by the people, the prudence and effort of the fighters and the wise leadership was the victory and support that forced the enemy to retreat, repent, and unilaterally halt its aggression. The proud and great nation of Iran is informed that the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran, without the slightest trust in the words of its enemies, remain armed and ready to deliver a decisive and regret-inducing response to any further hostile acts. Well, we are unpacking the latest developments with our correspondents in Washington, D.C., Amman, Jordan, and Tehran. And we begin with you, Ali Hashem, in the Iranian capital. So in the last hour or so, we've had a denial from the Iranians that they were behind a missile that was launched towards Israel earlier, and also confirmation, an official response from the Iranians that they accept the ceasefire that was announced by President Trump.
Yes, well, it added to the denial by the Iranian national broadcaster, the IRIB, to the launch of rockets. Now we have also the Iran Chief of Staff of Armed Forces also denying missile launch from Iran. So now it's denied not only by state media, but by the head of the armed forces on one side. On the other side, the Supreme National Security Council that is involved in the decision-making issued this statement in a way or another, implicitly accepting or recognizing the idea of a ceasefire or cessation of hostilities, yet framing it within the context of Israel has stopped and we are adhering to this situation by stopping because Iran didn't start this war. So this is the framing here. Of course, it's a war of narratives also. At the end, when a war comes to an end, there is kind of a narrative war, whereas each side would like to present themselves as winners or as victorious or as not giving up or conceding. So this is the position from here from Tehran. It's clear Iran is fully recognizing the ceasefire despite the wordings. And now also we're hearing from the spokesperson for the Foreign Ministry. I would like to read his statement. He says, our missile strikes against the U.S. Al Udeid Air Base were a legal measure under Article 51 of the UN Charter and the response to the U.S. aggression against our sovereignty and territorial integrity. This measure was not directed against our friendly and neighboring country, Qatar. and Iran is committed to its deep-rooted and good relations with this country. We're always committed to the principle of good neighborness with Qatar and other neighboring countries. And we will not allow the U.S. aggression and evil policies to incite discord between us and our brothers in the region.
So
this is the second time in less than 24 hours.
Yeah, a response then there again to the Iranian attack on the Al Udeid base, which is the American base here in Qatar, which we understand the Iranians, Ali, had warned both the Americans and the Qataris about prior to the attack happening.
Well, it's clear that in advance this was said, and the Iranians sent to the Qataris and the Americans. But at the end, to Qatar, a sovereign country, this is a breach of its sovereignty. And that's why there is this reaction, which is understandable. And to Iran, given the fact that yesterday in the statement by the Supreme National, or this morning, by the Supreme National Security Council, and now by the Foreign Ministry, they are stressing the idea of the brotherly relations, the deep relations with Qatar, and that this was not directed towards the state of Qatar. Now, on the other side, we saw Qatar playing the role in the mediation and bringing this whole episode, the 12 days war in the region, to an end. And of course, President Trump spoke about this, but despite the attack that occurred on Al Udeid base in Qatar, Qatar played this role. It's of course another victory for the Qatari diplomacy.
Right. A victory for Qatari diplomacy, and as you said, Ali, the Iranians also presenting their acceptance of this ceasefire as a victory. And again, Iran denying that the strikes on Israel after the ceasefire was announced came from Iran. I want to ask you, before we let you go, Ali, about how the Iranian public, the Iranian people, are viewing these latest developments, the ceasefire announcement, because these past 12 days have been costly to the Iranian people. We've had over 400 people killed, I believe, and a great deal of destruction and damage in Iran.
Well, Folly, this was the first war in decades that the Iranians had to go through. They went through a lot of things, sanctions, problems, political unrest, but this is the first time they had to feel the situation of insecurity. And this gave them a kind of another kind of a feeling right now. The solidarity that we saw among Iranians when it came to the war and how they dealt with it as a threat to their own entity, to their own country, to their own nation. Of course, today is another day. Today is the day after the war, and many people might be relieved because of the end of the war. But the big questions will start now on what's going to be in the future about the nuclear investment. This is an investment that's been going on for decades. How the Iranians are going to deal with this investment after what happened in the past 12 days. And also there are some probably issues that they will look towards as very strong defensive layers, such as the ballistic program. To them, this helped them in creating a kind of a balance of pain between Israel and Iran. It led them in this war create a kind of deterrence. So these are all questions not only within the normal Iranians or within the elite. It is going to be, these are going to be national questions. Everyone is going to ask these questions. And of course, the relation between the system and the people, because this war gave the country a chance to see a kind of a new rapport between the system and many of the sectors, even those who used to oppose the system. So how is this going to be dealt with? Is the government going to seize the opportunity to take more steps? These are the questions, strategic questions, big questions. Indeed. And the normal Iranian, how are they going to see this reflected later on their plates, in their houses, on their economy? Because today, with such a situation, the next day after the war, there'll be negotiations. The day after negotiations, there should be a deal or a way out of this whole situation. So these are right now the main priorities that people are looking towards.
Ali, thank you very much for that. Ali Hashem in Tehran. Let's now bring in Noor O'Day in Jordan's capital, Amman. Noor is keeping an eye on developments in Israel for us from Jordan. The Iranians, Noor, denying again the strikes on Israel after the ceasefire went into effect. What's the latest you're hearing from Israeli officials?
Well, fully, the Israeli media is reporting on those denials. They are saying that Iran adamantly rejects accusations that it fired those missiles, but we haven't seen a change from the Israeli Minister of Defense, who had posted instructions to the Israeli army to strike at Tehran in response, or a change of heart, if you will, from the Israeli Minister of Finance, Bezalel Smotrich, who said that Tehran will tremble. So we're waiting to see. Everybody knows that those hours are very tenuous. People are literally holding their breath until they can finally say that this is really over, and to see those restrictions in Israel lifted on ordinary day-to-day tasks. That's when they will know that this is really over, and so the coming hours will be decisive.
As you say, everyone holding their breath to see if this truce will hold. Talk to us about the reactions in Israel. We heard the statement from the Prime Minister thanking the U.S., of course, declaring this as a victory for Israel. But not everyone in his cabinet, especially the hardliners, will be happy about this decision to end the war.
Why is scattering that thing now?
That is right, although there is, I think, a realistic understanding, even within the hardliners or the more ultra-nationalists in this coalition government, that saying no to Trump after everything he's done in this confrontation that Israel started with Iran would have been impossible and really very costly. Israel was running low on air defense missiles. It needed to be resupplied with weapons and military equipment from the United States. 14 military cargo ships landed in Tel Aviv during this 12-day confrontation that we know of, that Israel declared. And so that dependency, that political protection, that military assistance was indispensable. Saying no to Trump would not have been an option. What we heard from some ministers, because there's almost a gag order on them from the Israeli Prime Minister, is congratulatory, expressing thanks to the army, expressing thanks to Donald Trump, and also talking about a historic victory. Bezalel Smotrich pointing or returning his attention to Gaza and saying now Israel would return with all its might to Gaza. So he's talking more war, just not at Tehran. And we heard from the Israeli Prime Minister saying that Israel was now on par with world powers. So that gives you an idea of the kind of narrative, the kind of messaging that this government wants to maintain. Talk of victory, decisive, historic, unprecedented, but also trying to look to other things, because attention in the opposition now is back to Gaza, where genocide has not stopped for 625 days fully.
Indeed. The war, the genocide in Gaza continues. And even if they're just past 12 days,
prepared, 4 Israelis have filed that involved because the cost of continuing this would have been
throughout the hours here on Al Jazeera. Let's just now remind the announcement unfolded. Here's Heidi Jo Castro with the details.
Even as air sirens sounded over Israel and Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump congratulated the two countries on social media, announcing the timeline, as announced by Trump, said the ceasefire would begin 6 hours after his announcement, posted at 22 GMT Monday. He said Iran would stop its attacks first, then Israel would follow, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the 12-day war will be saluted by the world. He went on to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and a 2-day airbase in Qatar. No damage or injuries were reported. After the attack, Trump reportedly told the Emir of Qatar that Israel had agreed to a ceasefire and asked for help to persuade Iran. Qatar's prime minister reportedly helped secure Iran's agreement. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance gave Trump credit for taking the deal over the finish line.
Now, what that means, I think, is we have to talk to Iran and, of course, to Israel about what the future holds. Because while we have obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, our hope and our expectation is that they're not going to try to rebuild that program.
Meanwhile, Trump's claim that the war between Israel and Iran was coming to an end brought relief to some Republicans on Capitol Hill, as all wait to see if the ceasefire holds. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Phil Lavelle is in Washington, D.C. for us. Phil, as Heidi said there, everyone waiting to see if this ceasefire hold. Remind us of how it came about, what President Trump said.
Well, President Trump says that both Israel and Iran called him pretty much at the same time, simultaneously, and said, we want peace. The Iranians have given a different account on one of their news broadcasts a little earlier. One of the anchors said that Trump called, and she said, these are her words, a begging-like manner after that US airbase was attacked in Qatar. But what'll be interesting to see, Folly, is what happens in the next half an hour or so, because we're expecting to see the president on the White House lawn. He's due to leave for the NATO summit. You've got to remember Donald Trump's character type and how we often see him in the media. He's quite a showman, which I think is fair to say, but also he wants to be seen as the peacemaker in chief. He's made no secret of the fact that he wants to be given the Nobel Peace Prize at some point. And the fact that this ceasefire seems to be very, very fragile, the fact that he only, 4.5 hours ago, put up that tweet saying, do not violate it, and already we're sort of having these concerns that it could be quite tenuous. It'll be interesting to see just what he has to say about that, because we know from Donald Trump that he can often come out with the most unpredictable things. And he vacillated wildly just over the last few days, from going to talking about the potential for a regime change to, as Heidi just said, God bless Iran, God bless Israel, and make Iran great again. So we're going to hear from him quite shortly, but it'll be quite intriguing just to see which way he takes this.
In the meantime, I mean, this is being seen as a win for him, for the US president. Talk to us about the reactions there in the US, especially from those who didn't want to see the US, the Americans involved in another conflict in the region, the Americans intervening on behalf of Israel. How is this being seen there?
Yeah, a few days ago, the party looked really split. Which was quite unusual for the way that Donald Trump holds the Republican Party, because he pretty much controls it. And yet you had these two different camps. You had your traditional, your hawkish Republicans like Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, who were saying, you've got to invade Iran. And they were actually going on television. They were appealing down the lens to the president and saying, Mr. President, you've got to do this now. It's your only opportunity. But at the same time, you had the Trump base, the Make America Great Again part of the party, which is essentially the part that he founded. And a lot of those voices are very anti going into any other country, because part of the DNA of Make America Great Again is focusing on America. It's about staying out of these foreign wars, staying out of Ukraine, all these foreign entanglements, and just focusing on American problems. And there was real concern from a number of very prominent voices within that part of the party. Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, influencers like Charlie Kirk, who were very, very loud voices, very prominent, who were saying this is not something we should be doing. And you could see that Donald Trump was torn. At one point, he had dinner with Steve Bannon, who is quite a big voice in the MAGA movement. He's credited as one of the people that helped Donald Trump win in 2016. He was saying to Donald Trump, we shouldn't be doing this. And you can see that the president was kind of veering in both directions. But what he's done now is he's appealed to both the hawks, because America went in, it dropped the bombs, and it came out. So it did what they felt he needed to do. But also, he's managed to keep the base happy, because he's gone in and he's come out. He's not got America involved. It's not been dragged into some longer war. So both parts of the party are quite happy. But I must also point out there's a lot of questions, aside from the ceasefire being asked here, Folly, about just how effective Operation Midnight Hammer was. Because obviously those bombers went in, they dropped the bombs, and they left. Right. It's been described as a roaring success by the president. He says it was completely and utterly obliterated Iran's nuclear ambitions. But at the same time, there are a lot of analysts here who are saying, well, it's too early to tell what happened. Did Iran perhaps move some of that uranium? Was it destroyed? J.D. Vance was asked this on television earlier today. He sidestepped the question. So the big question is, was that uranium destroyed? Did Iran manage to move it? And that's something that Donald Trump quite seriously can't answer at the moment.
Yeah. still unclear, as you say, the extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear program. Phil Lavelle in Washington, thank you for the moment, Phil. Thank you very much. Let's now speak to Abbas Aslani, who's in Tehran. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. Abbas, thank you so much for being with us throughout the hours here on Al Jazeera as we continue to follow the latest developments in this story and this ceasefire announcement between Israel and Iran, which the Iranians have now also said they will respect and abide by. Give us a sense of where do you think things stand and whether this ceasefire can hold.
Fully now, we are experiencing a fragile situation whereby the Israeli side is claiming that there have been receiving missiles. Iran is denying launching any missiles. But in the meantime, a military official here in Tehran said that Israelis have been attacking parts of Iran by 9 a.m. local time, which is, after the ceasefire taking into effect. And it seems that different parties, including the United States, they are trying to somehow keep the ceasefire in place. I think maybe the two sides might be pushing to the limits. Iran wants to say that it's not Lebanon or Syria. Israel in future and after the ceasefire cannot now and then come and attack parts of Iran and go unanswered. So I think they are trying to somehow set the red lines or the borders in order to stop further aggression, because establishing a deterrent following this war is very important, at least for Iran. So that's why Tehran wants to make sure there will be no further aggression.
Abbas, the Iranian leadership is presenting this ceasefire as a victory for Iran. How so? How is Iran emerging from this victorious?
Fully, as you said, Iran has been framing this as imposing the ceasefire on the Israeli side as well as the United States. They are saying that it was initially a kind of, let's say, and followed by Israel as a kind of the end of the war, and then they waited for Iran's confirmation that indicates that the other parties were under pressure to end this conflict. And Iran sees this a victory for itself as a kind of the success of its resistance against, an external aggression, because the aim and the outcome of the recent aggression was to destroy Iran's nuclear program. Tehran believes and thinks that this has not happened. It could be maybe there could be some delay as a result of that as well, because Iran has been able to respond to the attack. At least, support among the public. Tehran believes that despite some threats and costs and damages, it has had opportunities for the establishment and the political system. So that's why they think that it's the moment to somehow rally around the flag and to say that their resistance against an external threat and war has succeeded.
Where does it leave Iran's nuclear program, Abbas Aslani? The Americans claim to have dismantled it completely, although, as we've said, there is no assessment yet of the type of damage that was inflicted. But in terms of Iran's intentions going forward with this nuclear program, what are they? Will it continue?
Fully, Iranian officials, including the Iran's nuclear chief today, they said that they are investigating the extent of the damage to the nuclear facilities. And he said that they have been pre-planned, measures in order to recover and revive those damages and the facilities. And because they are saying that those centrifuges, those facilities have been made by Iranian scientists and, let's say, experts, they are able to recover them even in a shorter span of time comparing to the past. And one point which is significant is the killing of the number of scientists. This has been the case in the past. They think that Iran's nuclear program cannot stop by physical elimination of scientists or inflicting damages or sabotages against those facilities, because they think that they have the know-how, and in case of any, let's say, sabotage or damage, they are able to revive those facilities, equipment in future. And in the meantime, let's not forget that Iran is reconsidering its cooperation with the IAEA. This might be a new era and beginning for Iran's nuclear policies and program. And this indicates Tehran wants to say that your pressure, your war, your aggression has backfired. From now on, you will see a different era in terms of Iran's cooperation with the IAEA and its nuclear activities.
On that, the Iran reconsidering its position, there had been talk in the Iranian parliament of withdrawing Iran's participation in the NPT, the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty. Is that something that they are serious about, and what would be the timeline of that?
Fully the related commission, meaning the National Security Commission of the Parliament, they have passed the generality of the general outlines of a bill calling for suspension of Iran's cooperation with the IAEA. This could be a prelude, not necessarily exactly the withdrawal from the NPT, but a prelude for that in case of further pressure. And so this can impact Iran's, let's say, a cooperation with the UN watchdog, nuclear watchdog, in the opposite way. So that's why some are saying that Iran's cooperation in the past, membership in the NPT, has not benefited the country, but it has paved the way for further pressure on the country. So why should Iran remain in that treaty? And this is a serious discussion. Much more serious than ever.
Okay, Abbas, thank you very much for the moment. That's Abbas Aslani joining us there from Tehran. It is now 9:30 GMT. You're watching Al Jazeera and our continuing coverage of the Israel-Iran ceasefire. Let's remind you of the latest developments now. Iran's military chief has denied Israeli accusations that a ceasefire has been violated. Israel says missiles were launched soon after the truce came into effect. The Defense Minister Israel Katz says he's instructed the military to respond forcefully. The alleged Iranian attack came less than 2 hours after the Israeli government agreed to the ceasefire. Israel released a statement announcing it removed what it called a dual immediate existential threat from nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. Meanwhile, Iran's Supreme National Security Council says Israel was forced to accept defeat and a unilateral ceasefire. The body has also warned that Iranian armed forces remain prepared to respond to any further attack. Let's bring in once again Luciano Sakara, Professor of Gulf Politics at Qatar University here in Doha. Thank you, Luciano, for being with us again this morning as we continue to follow all the latest developments in this story. Quite a lot happening in the last 24 hours. It's been an emotional roller coaster, really, especially for us here in the region. Let me ask you first about these latest developments and the fragility of this ceasefire. We've heard already accusations from the Israelis that there's been a violation, which the Iranians have denied. Do you get a sense that both sides are committed to this truce?
To some extent, yes. Yes, but always this happens that when the ceasefire starts, both actors try to benefit as much as they can before the ceasefire is effective, and accusations, cross-accusations start to be used and issued between the two actors.
This happens very often when a truce is announced.
I'm not surprised that these kind of things are going on, and it's very difficult to confirm what happened or what did not happen. But as far as there is no an official decision taken by any of the two that they will not follow up with this ceasefire, I think we can say that at least we are safe at the time, that there's not going to be an escalation, that both accepted something that both consider a defeat of the other. I mean, it's clear that the Iranians consider that this was a victory.
But all of them are framing it as a victory. The Iranians are saying it's a victory. Netanyahu is saying it's a victory. It seems like it's...
Even Trump.
For Trump, it's the biggest victory for Trump. That's how he's been presenting it. It seems like almost the attack on the base here, here in Qatar, the Iranian attack on the American base, it was almost as a face-saving measure, action,
exactly,
where all sides could come out victorious in it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I repeat what I said before. I mean, since the fall of Assad regime, Iran accepted that there was a situation that was not favoring its position in the whole region, and therefore they accepted negotiating with the U.S. Without very clear terms, but we had 5 rounds of negotiations. And Trump wanted to impose his way of doing negotiations. Iran was trying to resist that, and in the middle of this negotiation that was trying to reach a stalemate between Iran and Israel, Netanyahu decided to take his own measures in order to derail these negotiations, and in order to I assume that what Netanyahu wanted to do was to eliminate absolutely and once for all any kind of threat that this was coming from Iran, and that any negotiation with the U.S. would not achieve that goal. And therefore, Netanyahu decided to achieve that goal that he claims he did, but actually we don't think he did.
Now, the confrontation between Israel and Iran is over for now, but the hostilities that have existed for decades between these two sides continue, and so does Israel's war on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. Do you see the ceasefire and the American intervention, Donald Trump's intervention here, having any effect in reaching a similar ceasefire in Gaza? Do you see it having an impact on the war in Gaza?
No, not at all. I mean, Trump pretended that he was interested in fixing this issue, but at the end of the day, we saw that he was interested only if he could get the credit of a ceasefire, but as far as this ceasefire was not possible, and he couldn't even pressure enough Netanyahu to stop the offensive against Gaza, he decided to focus on something else, trying to achieve it.
But don't you think he would want to pressure Netanyahu on Gaza now to stop the war on Gaza?
I mean, he should. If he is consistent...
Given that he presents himself as a peacemaker of the region.
If he is consistent with his own way of understanding what he can do or what he wants to do, which is achieve global peace or at least regional peace, he should follow the next conflict. He said, I mean, in his inauguration, he said that he wanted to fix this in short term. He did not fix it. He started another problem because at the end of the day, bombing Iran is not fixing, but starting a new problem. He claimed that he fixed it in 12 days. Okay, now is your turn to fix the other issue that is still there for more than 18 months. And you promised that you would do it, and so far nothing happened. So I think this is an opportunity for Trump, if he really is a man of peace, to push Netanyahu to say, okay, we stopped that, we made peace between you, both of you. You claim that you achieve your goals, it's okay. So you can claim that you are victorious in this war against all your enemies, including Iran. So now fix the problem that you have.
Now, another country, Luciano, that is said to have played a big role in achieving this ceasefire behind the scenes is Qatar, of course. The country which Iran attacked last night, the U.S. base here in Doha, which the Qataris have complained about, summoned the Iranian ambassador. They've played a role, I understand, in achieving this ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Tell our viewers more about the Qatari mediation efforts and the influence they played on the Iranians, the influence they've had on the Iranians all along.
Well, Qatar is a country that has the best relations from all the GCC states with Iran, and I think it is on the benefit of the mutual or bilateral relations that will make possible to continue.
Right. Do you think, sorry to interrupt you, do you think that's why the Iranians chose to target the American base here in Qatar?
Absolutely, because they knew that it is possible to mend ties with Qatar, and if they had done this with Kuwait, Emirates or Bahrain, would have been much more complicated to solve that. That Qatar understands much more the needs of Iran and the threat perceptions of Iran. And also, Qatar wants to preserve that role of mediator and negotiator in the region, including Iran. Iran just bombed Qatar, but Qatar still is trying to help the region to solve its problem, while the United States pretends to be a mediator, but is bombing the country that wants to mediate with.
Well, Luciano, let's remind our viewers of what happened hours before that ceasefire by President Trump was announced, and Iran's attack on an American base here in Qatar. an attack which Tehran says was a justified response to the American strike on its nuclear facilities. Here's Behdad Mahichi with more on that.
Projectiles and interceptions in the sky, this time over the Qatari capital, Doha. Shelter-in-place warnings as a barrage of Iranian missiles target the largest U.S. airbase in the Middle East, in what's being seen as a symbolic show of force. Tehran calls it legitimate self-defense and retaliation for the American bombing of its nuclear facilities on Sunday.
The message of this decisive action is clear and direct to the White House and its allies. The Islamic Republic of Iran will not leave any act of aggression against its territorial integrity, sovereignty, or national security unanswered under any circumstances.
Right, I'm going to have to be very careful. Whoa! The airspace temporarily closed over Qatar as defenses shot down all but one of the missiles fired, the attack resulting in no injuries or deaths. But drawing condemnation from Qatar, which holds deep ties with Iran.
Qatar condemns, in the most severe words, the Iranian missile attack on the Al Udeid Qatari airbase. This attack represents a blatant violation of the sovereignty of the country of Qatar and a contradiction to the principles of good neighborliness, and represents an attack on international legitimacy and international law. And the state of Qatar confirms that it reserves the right to respond.
The sprawling Al Udeid base just outside of the capital, Doha, typically hosts some 10,000 American troops. But most personnel and aircraft were evacuated last week, the clearance visible in satellite imagery. Washington and Qatar say they were warned in advance that the attack was coming. Some suggesting it's Tehran's way of signaling it doesn't want to escalate the conflict further. Behdad Mahichi, Al Jazeera.
A reminder that we're waiting for a news conference by the Qatari Prime Minister, which was expected about 2 hours ago, over 2 hours ago, running late, as you can see. He'll be speaking alongside the visiting Lebanese Prime Minister. And as soon as that begins, we will bring it to you live, of course. Luciano, let me come back to you on Qatar's role in the mediation, not just on this ceasefire between Israel and Iran, but also on the Gaza war. This is a country that has taken on an important role in this region. Remind our viewers of, what Qatar's relationship has been, not just with Iran, but also the Americans. I mean, a number of countries on opposing sides seem to rely on Qatar when it comes to negotiations.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Qatar has been a very relevant actor in all this issue that started in October 2023 in terms of mediation. There were some periods in which Qatar showed frustration because there was no collaboration between the different parts. Qatar was part of the two ceasefires agreements that they were reached. That one of them was not followed up by Israel. Qatar keeps also mediating between Iran and the United States in different aspects of this negotiation. And despite the fact that Qatar has been accused, both in the United States by some sectors or conservative sectors, accused inside Israel as well. There were many op-eds published saying that Qatar should be the next enemy of Israel to be targeted. There were many accusations against Qatar, and Qatar did not stop playing that role, that relevant role of mediator, even though Iran attacked Qatar yesterday. Qatar wants to keep that role of mediation in this region. It's conscious about the relevant role that Qatar has been playing since a long time ago in terms of mediation, and they want to continue that. And I don't think that Qatar will engage in any kind of military adventure to punish or to do anything against any other state, as the United States did with Iran before asking for the ceasefire. I think Qatar has its own way of doing international politics that so far proved to be more useful and more constructive in the region rather than destructive as we have been seeing from Israel lately.
All right, Luciano, thank you for the moment. Let's get the view from Israel now and speak to Meron Rappaport once again. who's an editor and writer at the Local Call, an Israeli news site. Meron, thank you again for being with us. What is being said in Israel about how this ceasefire between Israel and Iran came about?
I think there was some surprise, especially if we consider that Netanyahu, from the beginning of the war, said that he will negotiate, that he will continue the war, and the negotiation, if there are negotiations, will be under fire. But then the fire stops, and there's no agreement for reduction of enrichment of uranium or anything else. So in a way, it's a little bit surprising. It is less than Netanyahu himself in a news conference a few days ago put as the conditions for the end of the war. Of course, the end of the Iranian nuclear program, and of the ballistic missiles, and of support to the what is called the axis of evil, what is called here the axis of evil. So all this is not fulfilled, and yet there is a ceasefire. So it was a little bit by surprise, I think.
A ceasefire that came as a surprise, you say, Meron. We know the nature of his cabinet and the hardliners he has to deal with. Will that be a problem for him? Because, as we've been saying, this deal came as a result of President Trump intervening on behalf of Israel. So presumably he will not want to disappoint Trump, Netanyahu. How does he convince those hardliners in his government, in his coalition, that this ceasefire needs to be kept and maintained?
The hardliners will not dismantle the government for this, even if they are not 100% happy, and even if some of them were quite clear that they want to see a regime change, not only more a commitment by Iran to dismantle all its nuclear program, but also a regime change. This is, of course, much less. But I think these ministers understand.
All right, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Meron. We are finally going to go to this news conference here in Doha with Qatar's Prime Minister and the Lebanese Prime Minister, the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, speaking there alongside the visiting Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam. Let's
welcome my dear friend and brother, Dr. Nawaf Salam, the Prime Minister of Lebanon, the brotherly state of Lebanon. I would like also to apologize for the delay in the air traffic yesterday, as we were keen on maintaining his safety and the safety of the air skies. That's why he was forced to delay for a few hours in Bahrain. We had a joint meeting after his meeting with His Royal Highness the Emir of Qatar, where we discussed bilateral relations and means of cooperation between our respective countries. We also spoke about the venues in which we can work together to support stability in Lebanon. One of the major issues discussed was that of energy and how to work together to rehabilitate the energy infrastructure in Lebanon. Very important discussions were held between both the energy ministers, which will be followed by work plans in the coming months. In addition to that, we touched upon the urgent needs in order to provide the necessary energy to our brothers in Lebanon during the summer season. This will be examined by Qatar Energy Fund. During the meeting, we also discussed cooperation in transportation and air navigation, where discussions were held between the Minister of Transportation and his counterpart in Lebanon. In addition to the efforts aiming at supporting the rebuilding and reconstruction efforts in Lebanon, namely in the areas destroyed by the Israeli occupation forces. During the meeting, we had the opportunity to discuss the regional developments and the events unfolding around us. And here I seize the opportunity to vehemently condemn the Israeli violation of the ceasefire agreement as they continue to violate the sovereignty of Lebanon. This is unacceptable and should be clearly and candidly condemned. We look forward that the Security Council would live up to its duties and responsibility in order to put an end to Israel's irresponsible acts in the region. We also discussed the regional developments in general and also the development of the Lebanese-Syrian relations, which we hope they will improve in the future. We have felt total keenness from His Excellency to develop healthy and good relations with all the regional countries, and the State of Qatar fully supports these endeavors. Today, regretfully, we stand after very bitter conditions the region has lived and challenges unprecedented long ago. The sovereignty of the State of Qatar was violated as the Iranian Revolutionary Guard launched missile attack on the U.S. military base in Al-Udeid, which we strongly and vehemently condemn, as the State of Qatar has always adopted the principles of good neighborhood and transparency in dealing with Iran, and the State of Qatar continues to maintain its policy of good neighborhood. And from day one, Qatar condemned the Israeli attacks on the Islamic Republic of Iran and also the damage suffered by the Iranian people. At the end of the day, the Iranian people are
welcome to the program.
Neighboring
this is
people
Politics Today live on
which we
Channel
do not
Television.
wish
I'm
any
Sean
harm.
Okimale here.
At the same time, the attack on the State of Qatar is an unacceptable act, especially that the State of Qatar has been making great diplomatic efforts in order to have the situation de-escalated. Regretfully, we were taken by surprise by the Iranian attack, especially that we are dealing with them on the basis of neighboring and friendly, brotherly state. And here I commend the role of the Qatari Armed Forces under the leadership of His Royal Highness the Emir of Qatar, who has been on constant contact upon the receipt of intelligence information about the potential of Iranian attack on the U.S. base in Qatar, and we succeeded in fending off this attack. And here I would like to particularly commend and point out that the Qatari Armed Forces carried out a successful operation where the Qatari air defenses intercepted all the missiles fired from Iran, with the exception of one. Here I would like to also express thanks and appreciation to the friendly and brotherly state who expressed their solidarity with the state of Qatar, namely the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council member states, who harried to express support and solidarity with the state of Qatar. And at the behest of the presidency state, Kuwait, an emergency meeting will be held in Doha, and the foreign minister of the GCC member states will be received in Doha to examine these grave developments. Here I would like also to point out a number of issues. We should look at the developments unfolding in the region with reason and responsibility, and following the flagrant violations by the Israeli occupation forces on regional states and following the Iranian attacks on Qatar, it is clear that these irresponsible actions bring about nothing but instability and could plunge the entire region in a more difficult situation. We, the Qatari Armed Forces, under the directives of the Commander-in-Chief, His Royal Highness, the Emir of Qatar, we have been examining the possibilities of responding to the Iranian attacks. However, the state of Qatar is always adopting reason and prudence, adopting amicable and peaceful means. The message we would like to send out that the state of Qatar, with the capabilities at hand and the prowess of the armed forces, succeeded in proving to all and one that the state of Qatar is capable of defending its territories, its homeland, its people, and the residents living in Qatar. We all stood united following this attack. Some telephone calls were made with His Royal Highness the Emir of Qatar. One with the President of the United States, where the developments were put to discussion and the means to respond to the event. There was also an opportunity to announce a total and complete ceasefire on all fronts. Our friends in the United States proposed that the state of Qatar will initiate communication with the Iranians in order to examine their preparedness to this proposal. We initiated communication with the Iranian, and then it was followed by the announcement made by the US President, which we welcome. However, the violations of the ceasefire witnessed this morning are unacceptable, and we hope that the ceasefire will hold, diplomacy would prevail, and we urge the parties to observe and abide by the agreements reached. We also urge the Americans in order to revive the nuclear talks in order to have a diplomatic solution, which has been the goal the state of Qatar has been endeavoring to achieve